Do you face a disastrous situation, maybe a natural disaster, perhaps poverty, perhaps situations where things haven't worked out where you expect, and you're looking for a way to approach the problem and go beyond the immediate pressures? This is applicable in a business environment. This is applicable in your day-to-day life, but it is a powerful problem-solving strategy that has served me well over the years. I'm Justin Hitt from Inside Strategic Relations. So I'm not the usual type of guy. I'm not motivated by individuals' sad stories. And I kind of hold people to an expectation that they're going to take action. And perhaps this came from me when growing up. My dad's is a Marine, former Marine, I guess always a Marine. But when we would complain about problems, as I mentioned before, he'd often say, well, what are you doing about it? Or he'd say, a Marine finds a solution because, you can collect problems all day long, but, what are you going to do with them? They just burden you. They draw you down. And so we always had a solution mindset. How can we solve this problem? How can we eliminate this challenge? How can we overcome this frustration? And so I've carried that along in my life. And one of the things I do for clients is help them with disaster response. And that, of course, can be an economic change that causes product sales to drop. It could be a response to policy, laws, rules, and regulations in the risk management world. It could be business continuity with the IT services world. And so in addressing these things for more than 20 years, I've learned a few strategies that actually will drill down and help you move towards solutions. Now, I apply these in the permaculture world. When we talk about disaster recovery, I apply them in marketing. I find they have high utility value in many different areas of your life. And so I'm going to share with you here today 4 key aspects that you want to look at. Now, I've worked for military contractors, Fortune 100 companies, in the healthcare and financial services companies. I've worked in technical services. So maybe the examples here would be best for overcoming difficult situations, and we're going to put it in the moderate level. Because if I talk about overcoming poverty, and people are going to say, oh, well, you make it sound so simple that individuals can take action in their own environment and improve their situation and create examples that they can share with other people and become leaders. And through their individual leadership, they can eliminate themselves from poverty. Well, I've been homeless before. I've lost everything in business and I've done very well. And then I've lost everything again and done very well. I understand the cycles of going back and forth. And typically it is my behavior, my bad habits or lack of good habits that have caused the situation to turn out negatively. In fact, any situation you face today is the result of your activity and behaviors and implementation of knowledge for years going forward. And so I don't want to say it's your fault things are not working out, but you're definitely the first person who's going to move towards a solution. Now, I don't want to talk about the Fortune 100 companies because when you have 1,500 people in a risk management department, they're doing governance and compliance, it's easier to build systems so that more things work well. And then it's also easier to hide those things that go wrong and adapt to those things that go wrong and tell a story that makes it easier to get out of problems when things go wrong. So we're going to talk right in the middle, which is a business owner or executive in a medium-sized business. You're looking at $5 million or more in gross. And typically in that business environment, the problems you face can be addressed with these 4 elements. Now, I want to focus first on the tenets for fast recovery. And I'll use an agricultural example there. And ultimately, we can go into these 4 tenets first, because then I can show you how we apply them. So you might say, well, I'm a business owner, I'm an executive, I don't have an agricultural situation. I'm not in an environment where I'm trying to feed myself, or I'm trying to provide shelter, um, or I'm trying to just keep a roof over my head. But when we think about the concept of minimal viable approach, we have to know what is the next level of comfort we need to be at. And so if we're at 0, the next level of comfort is clean water, basic food, basic safety and sanitation. If you're in a business environment and you want to grow the business and suddenly you've had a setback, then the minimum viable is to maintain the level of income or the level of profitability. And we tend to look at profitability because your income can go up and down, but there are ways to keep your profit strong. But we also adapt for a realistic understanding of those conditions or those measures. What does that mean? Well, if you're looking at your net profit year over year, and you just simply from a general accounting perspective say net profit year over year, but do not make an adjustment for inflation, then you won't have enough capital coming in to recover for the expenses in the current period. So what does this mean? You have last year's earnings, this year's earnings, and then forecasted earnings for the next year. If you do a year over year and you're up 5% year over year, but the inflation rate was 10%, then you're actually negative 5%. And next year, in order to stay even, you've got to create 10% or more to just break even. Because again, current inflation rate applied to historical dollar values becomes a discount on the percentage growth. Then we adjust our production. So if we want to increase 10% next year, you actually have to double the business at 20%. You have to double the growth at 20%. Now on paper, this is easier to do, and we would draw a board. We'd print out your P&L statements, and we would go down the line, and we'd say, okay, what are these percentages? Most accounting systems can do this. And then within our current state, what is the minimum viable things that must be done in order to maintain the current state, inflation adjusted? And then, of course, you may want to put your margins in there because if we're looking at gross numbers, we need to know what the margin is. And then we need to check to see what is maintaining our margin. So that could be profitable customer analysis. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, oh my gosh, Justin, this is way more complex than I thought it was. I'm already in a difficult situation. I already have problems. I'm already frustrated. And what happens with stress is that we have a mental blockage. So the stress causes a desire for some outside solution just to come in and solve everything. And then it also conditions our brain to want a simple solution. So somebody who's in a poverty situation just wants money because if they had money, they would have goods and services, not understanding that those goods and services, if they received without the money, is just as good as the money. May even be better than the money because it wouldn't be a taxable event. So in a business, when you say, I want more sales, is it that you really want more sales, or do you want more customers who are profitable? And so that you have that net. What is the net? And then a lot of times people will say, well, no, I just need more sales. If we just had more sales. No, if you had more free positive net cash flow, you could have equivalent to more sales, but it would be more stable in the organization because we'd know how you got that. And folks are like, well, this doesn't make any sense. So we have to model it in such a way in order to kind of systematically approach the issue. So we use what's called issue management, where we identify a problem or defect. We drill down into the root cause for that specific problem or defect, and then we issue specific corrective actions. So stress is going to cause you to want this instant solution. It's going to want someone to come out from the outside and be a savior and fix it. It's going to want you to have a certain cash position where you're really just going to use the cash to buy access to resources. So the access to resources is more beneficial because it's got fewer steps. And so we break it down into the problem. What's the big problem? And then we can challenge that problem. So if you want more money, so in an agricultural situation or a poverty situation, if you want more, more food, you think money is the only solution, and you start looking at, well, what do we really want? We want health and nutrition. So now you can start saying, okay, well, the problem is a lack of health and nutrition. The root cause is not enough food, not enough money to buy seeds or the inputs, not enough skills to grow the food. Therefore, the action might be knowledge first. And see, if you're in a difficult situation already, you're going to need to have this analysis done consistently, then focus on specific implementation and actions, prioritize the work, and then you'll move towards stability. But again, stability is a set of new habits that are consistently implemented to create certain minimal viable outcomes. Now, what if your situation is already good? You don't have any major problems. Things are already good. And that mindset can lull you into a false sense of security because we really can't control the environment. If there's a natural disaster, we can't control the economy. If there's some dumb decision that was made 10 years ago and suddenly comes to hurt everybody, there's massive fraud or something like that. So what we have to do up front is risk mitigation as part of our planning and adapting to changing environments, because there's changes in the environment that we can't see. And that's just life. That's how circumstances happen. But the risk mitigation itself would be looking at our processes, for example, and determining in advance which processes are likely to contribute to the profits of the organization, which processes are likely to contribute to health and nutrition, and then ultimately testing our assumptions and reinforcing those things that are of value. What are reinforcements? It could be controls that you implement. It could be a certain procedure that you implement or best practices. But ultimately, again, it's driving towards that minimal viable approach, because if you can't perform the minimum, then you won't be able to perform the maximum. It's also building up plans in advance so if something goes wrong. And that's the last tip here, which is fast recovery plans. And so I'm going to give you a practical example and some of the human reactions in that practical example. But the risk mitigation feeds a plan should there be a problem. So business continuity, for example, if all your computers crash and the network goes down, how are you going to keep the business running? Just come up with a plan, put it in place. It adds a little bit to the overhead, but ultimately creates better results. What if we lost our best customers? You identify your top 10 customers. What if you lost them? Do you have a plan to replace them? So the fast recovery plans is first stabilization, and then it's growth. So if you don't have stabilization and you run off with growth, you're going to end up having mixed numbers and more confusion. So what is the typical response when a company is having a problem, when a business owner or an executive is having a problem? This is the same typical response, because it's human behavior, as someone who can't feed themselves. The number one thing is going to be to beg for help, is to ask for help, is going to go desperate into the marketplace looking for help. That is the fastest way to be taken advantage of. Number two is they're going to start teaching things as a means of verifying in the audience or verifying in the marketplace whether or not they're on the right path without asking for help. So they're going to swallow their pride. They're going to say, well, our company does this, our company does that. And so they're going to try to impress people around them to engage in business or to otherwise engage so that they can ask for help. None of those things work, because one of the things I find that as a leader, as someone who has knowledge and solutions, I can only teach the people who are willing to listen. And then how do I know they're listening? Well, I know because they're implementing small things. That's why in every one of my podcasts, I say, if you have any questions, here's how you ask. And so the questions is an indicator on whether or not you're actually paying attention or you're implementing any of this. Now, it's also a self-check. It's part of my controls to see whether or not I'm conveying useful information in a way that people can understand. Because if I got to get a lot of questions for clarification, then I haven't done my job. But if I get questions for implementation, then that person has signaled that they are worthy of additional knowledge. Okay? Now, all people are worthy of clean water and clean food and good health, but very few are worthy of actual help that will make a massive difference, because I don't want to put the effort into helping somebody who's not going to turn around and multiply the value of our time and effort. Now, there are ways that you can get groups of people together. We can talk about that at another time. But when it comes to you facing a problem, you can be mentally distracted by the stress of the problem. You can be kind of scatterbrained and fighting all these different dragons while you're trying to get the basics accomplished. But until you step back for defining the minimum viable, step back and look at recovery plans that you've prepared in advance or that other people have prepared that work well. And you start the practices of you got 99 problems, but which of these problems are worth facing or worth addressing? So in fact, the stress response is confusion. And in marketing, we want to create the fear and the stress response in individuals and then give them a clear out. And so that's not something you want to be on a receiving end of, because it's very powerful. It's, for example, somebody's going to show you horrible, starving children. The children aren't horrible, by the way, but the conditions are horrible and that they're starving. And then they're going to ask for help. They're not going to say, hey, I'd like you to help some starving children. No, they're going to show you pictures. They're going to start building that stress response. But that stress response in your brain is confusion. It's an inability to focus. It's easy distraction. It's chasing solutions rather than systematically assessing the situation and addressing possible solutions and testing solutions. It's almost a heightened ADHD, and it's a fragmented mental state. Now, inducing that in other people is a social engineering methodology or an influence methodology, but being aware that that could be happening to you, or it's happening in your environment, is a means of stability so that you can start doing problem definition, root cause analysis, definitions of corrective actions. Now, where do the corrective actions come from? They come from your fast acting plan. So we want to stabilize the situation. We want to go from stability to expansion, then from expansion to syndication. Stability is a meal on your table. Expansion is 3 meals in one day. And then syndication is teaching others how to feed themselves so that they are less burdened on you trying to solve your base problems. In a business, it's getting a few key customers and then multiplying those customers by understanding their needs and then doing marketing and sales. And then finally, syndication is enlisting others in expanding that particular network. You have to understand that it'll take new habits to overcome the problems that your bad habits have created. It's not enough just to eliminate the bad habits. You need to actually create these new habits. So when I talk about business process and I talk about implementation of best practices, when I talk about testing, especially in the business development world, we want to test what we assume about our audience to determine whether it's true or not. These are about conditioning for new habits. And so the implementation is part of the conditioning activity. In fact, you raising your hand, and I'm very transparent about what I'm doing here because I want you to understand these strategic relations methods. But you raising your hand and asking a question and me assessing the intent of the question. Some people have the intent to get free information. Some people have the intent to purchase. Some people have the intent of learning something so they can do it themselves. I'm able to assess where should I invest my time and effort, but also how to create new materials to bring people along to solve their problems. Because if you can solve a big problem right now with what I've shared here today and the 4 tenets, which I'll summarize before I wrap up, then we're syndicating knowledge. I only have to record this video one time. And then you can use it 1 time, 10 times, 50 times. You can build on it. You can gain a body of knowledge around it. We can work together to solve your problem, where if I just gave you money or if I just gave you a solution or I just put it in front of you, you wouldn't value it. You wouldn't take action. So syndicating knowledge among people who are willing to learn and to implement allows you to build a network. This is where the relationships come in, a network of individuals with knowledge, resources, and a shared incentive to help each other. So by focusing on the small groups, and sometimes that group is you, the center and focus of influence, sometimes changing your own behavior and habits, positions a more stable and long-term solution, where again, you can move towards the minimum viable, and that minimum viable will grow over time, where you can implement your fast recovery plans if you've had the opportunity to do risk mitigation in the beginning. But if you haven't been able to do risk mitigation in the beginning, your understanding of what the minimum viable is will help you determine what problems you face. So this is issue management, what problems you face, what's the root cause of those problems, and then what are corrective actions that we can take. The actions that we can take are the new behaviors and habits. This is a very useful and powerful way to solve problems. It can solve catastrophic problems. You can use this to address catastrophic problems, a complete breakdown of an economic system, the failure of a government. And in fact, I've gained some of these insights by interviewing people who have experienced these things, such as people who have immigrated to the United States under adverse conditions, individuals who have been in war, individuals who have a warrior mindset or a producer mindset, and even folks during the dot-com that went from millions of dollars a year to nothing. I've been involved with quite a few different types of diverse things, but again, consistently, it is these 4 elements that get you back on track. Now, if you need help developing a business continuity plan, developing a marketing plan that that adapts to economic changes, in identifying problems and how to solve them. Even in the agricultural side, we do some work in permaculture and in regenerative agriculture because the concepts are the same. A minimum viable approach for a regenerative environment is no erosion. We want to contain all the erosion, keep the soil where it's met. Clean water. Well, reducing erosion cleans the water up, but is the water suitable for humans? Growth of biomass and crops that would feed our animals or to feed ourselves. It's the same thing as a publishing environment where you have, we worked with a big publisher and they had a million page view. Well, it was actually a million unique visitors a day. It was a lot of page views. But we had like 20 servers on the front end, and that was just the load balancing. And then behind the load balancing, there were hundreds of other computers because if one computer failed, we want to minimize the impact of that. And so we had recovery plans. We had controls to verify each machine had the same content on it. So the complexity of the environment doesn't matter as much as your approach. And so I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and we've been talking about an approach, 4 key elements to address catastrophic conditions in adverse environments. If you want practical application for this, I have a hurricane marketing system, which talks specifically about the application of this triage method, this approach with a little bit more detail when it comes to business development after a natural disaster or catastrophic event. In other areas, we talk about business recovery or cash surges. So maybe the business has been stable for a while, and now we want to jump the business to the next level. Similar concepts can get applied in those ways. However you apply this, even if you're just solving for hunger, it is the same 4 elements that kind of bootstrap and get things up and running. And if you'd like specific help there, my typical client is an organization with $5 million or more gross. Those folks, enjoy my publications. I've also worked for Fortune 100s in the risk management departments, whether that is operational risk or technology risk. And then in general, I have coaching clients that we help solve this in their particular businesses. Typically a professional services business, because when you understand this, you can develop marketing campaigns that help clients come out of that state of confusion into a state of assurance associated with your organization so that you can deliver those valuable solutions to them. And then, of course, these 4 key tenets: issue management, risk mitigation, fast recovery plans, and minimal viable approach become services. So if you want to explore these things in details, I'm available by consultation. Visit at www.insidestrategicrelations.com, where you can also join a free newsletter or ask your questions. But again, at www.insidestrategicrelations.com, we are helping solve complex problems. We're doing it through building of business relationships, building of systems that reinforce the value of those relationships, and ultimately problem-solving critical thinking that positions you as an expert. Again, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. I'll see you in the next podcast.